Good evening, and welcome to the 2020 Kentucky State Poetry Society Keynote with poet Maurice Manning. My name is Amelia Martins, and I serve as the Vice President of KSPS. I first met Maurice way back in 2004. It was my first year as a grad student in creative writing at Indiana University, and Maurice had just arrived to teach his first year in that program. It was an honor and a great time to be Maurice's student. That I am now a Kentucky poet also speaks of Maurice's continuing influence on my own work. Maurice is what my grandmother would call good people, and it's my honor to introduce him tonight. Please note that you may ask questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will get to as many of your questions as time allows after Maurice's reading. Maurice Manning has published 7 books of poetry, most recently, Rail Splitter. His first book, Lawrence Booth's Book of Visions, was selected by W.S. Merwin for the Yale series of younger poets. His fourth book, The Common Man, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. A former Guggenheim Fellow, Maurice teaches at Transylvania University and lives with his family on a small farm in Kentucky. Please welcome Maurice.
Thank you, Amelia. Before I get too far into reading poems to everybody, I want to especially thank Sarah and Amelia, who between the two of them got in touch with me and invited me to take part in this great gathering. And I've been really pleased throughout today, at least, to follow the readings this morning, which were wonderful. I observed Carrie's great workshop on repetition and Letha's workshop this afternoon on finding the right words and the sounds of words. I enjoyed all of this. And some of you, actually the panel discussion earlier with Amy Miller, who Amy and I happened to go to college together way back in a previous century. And I was pleased to see Chris McCurry and hear about great things he's doing. Katie Yoakum at Spalding. Anyway, I'm so pleased to be part of this conference and pleased to share in the great things that you all have made possible by organizing this. I'm going to read, as Amelia said, I'm going to read for a while, and then you all can post questions through the Q&A button, and then Amelia will pass them on to me. I'm going to read from, this is my newest book called Rail Splitter, and it has a very long subtitle. Let's see if I can make that. Reflections on the art of poetry composed in the posthumous voice of Honest Abe Lincoln, former Pres U.S. Some of you may know that Lincoln loved poetry, and it's scattered throughout his letters. He cites poems in some of his famous speeches. As you also know, he was killed in a theater watching a comedy. And so this is my effort to channel Lincoln's posthumous voice on the surface, thinking about poetry with quotes around that word. I think I'm going to read 8 of these. So imagine, if you will, that I am 6'4". I'm wearing a black frock coat and skulking around a dimly lit stage. A brief refutation of the rumor that I allowed Willie and Tad to relieve themselves in my upturned hat on a Sunday morning at the office while their mother was attending religious services. I will allow a tall hat can be put to purposes other than the polite covering of the head. And the record shows I carried papers in mine, important papers too, and for dramatic effect, I'd pull them out in court, bewildering my opponents. But that was practical. The documents intended to prove my claim were sheltered from the weather and less likely to be lost. And having words I'd taken care to write proximate to the head from which they sprang permitted me to ponder them, to keep them, so to speak, in the nest a little longer before they flew into the room to batter against the smudged windows of a prairie courthouse amid the clangs of the punctuating spittoon. It was a commonplace to fill my hat with oats and feed my horse when I was riding on the circuit. And the rooms where I lodged had few accommodations, so the hat was handy as a basin if a morning ablution were required. On this occasion, however, the hat was mere amusement for the boys who set it on the office floor and pitched pennies into it, stepping farther back each round as I was reading on the couch. Their mother was indeed at church. The weather was profoundly cold and the privy regrettably distant from the office, so boys being boys, with a famously permissive father, I agreed to let them use my boot. Transcendentalism. Lincoln's life is nearly overlaps with our American transcendentalists, Thoreau and Emerson, and to some extent Melville and Hawthorne. Transcendentalism. One of the things the actor's bullet failed to do was to interrupt the rhythm of thought, the flow of the mind as it moves around an encumbrance or wears it down as water patiently tames a rock and may, in time, pass through it freely. Contemplation is all there is of the afterlife. The mind continues steadily, not seeking decision or destination, unable to rest and yet at ease, because the thought is always lulling back and forth as a boat gently rocking, following the rhythm of the world. Raindrops dripping off the eave are keeping eternal time. The capacity of the mind is oceanic. It laps and swells and subsides. The sun flares out of it and then extinguishes itself in the dark waters of thought. The divine ditty of the universe, the endless pitter-patter. I was reminded of Carrie's workshop on repetition earlier today. This poem that I just read is in couplets, but they are not evenly metrical couplets. The first line is 5 beats, the second line is 4. So 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 4 on down. And a couplet is a basic form of repetition, but a metrical line is also an invitation for repetition. So those of you who were interested in that, that's my effort to reinforce some of the wisdom Carrie was sharing with you. Learning to write with a feather. This is historically accurate. The claim my cousin offered after I died that he'd killed a buzzard for a single feather in order to bend my fingers around the quill that I might learn the shapes of letters is true. How strange that I could read most anything and grasp it. If I read it twice aloud, I could recall it ever after, word for word. There's a divinity that shapes our ends. A line from Hamlet I used to savor because it sounds just right, yet the meaning bounds away as the mind, desiring comprehension, advances. And all of this before I could write my name. For what was printed differed from what was written. It didn't occur to me in early years that reading was the offspring of writing. So getting ahead in reading was backing up. Though once I began with letters, I hadn't ink or money for it, or paper. And furthermore, I had nothing of my own to say. So I copied all of Hamlet in the air, from his father's ghost and on to Yorick's skull, the black feather twittering like a wren, single feather representing the bird in full. Synecdoche, I think it is. My mother, who could read but couldn't write, presented all of her person with an X. Lincoln also liked music, and this is another poem that's historically accurate following the Battle of Antietam. Lincoln went to tour the battlefield, which was strewn with wounded and dying Union soldiers and corpses. And he asked his personal secretary, John Hay, to sing a song that was popular at the time, which turns out to have been a minstrel tune. On having a fondness for sentimental songs and verses. I like the one about the banjo player who takes his banjo with him when he meets his friends up in the sky. The verse says, something else am mighty true, the banjo gwine to be there too. The wit delivered by the primitive voice. And I can't argue with the theology, at least it's interesting. If banjos are allowed in heaven, then there's something to do besides patiently counting down eternity or basking in holy light.
Hey, you!
Not that it matters much to me in my state of being merely a mind that's tuned, I suppose, to resonate. Let's call it a twang in there, a very American twang, originating from a gourd and a stick and a few strings. A nonsense song may have a deeper meaning or not, or maybe it acquires meaning through time. That's very American too, meaning catching up with time or time simply ceasing to matter. And the truth is left as plain and silent as a banjo hanging from a peg on the wall. I like that image, a plain American image, and something else and mighty true, a banjo with a metaphorical shadow ironically attached to it. An image like that, suspended in time, will change. As I said, Lincoln was at Ford's Theater the night he was shot, and he was seeing a performance of a British comedy called Our American Cousin. Um, and the title of this poem is supposedly the last line heard from the stage before Lincoln was shot. You sockdologizing old man trap. I was laughing hard when the bullet entered my mind, an abrupt idea lodging there unfinished, and I had brayed like a donkey earlier in the play. Following such misery and discord, it was a pleasure to hear laughter, to hear the uproar of the audience and feel my hand involuntarily reach out and clap my knee as if it now again belonged to me. Tragedy divides and turns on willful moral division, but comedy unifies by accident, and the restoration of order is a surprise. And so by accident, I was united for a moment, for a little span of time. Speaking to Mary after a speech. After giving a speech, most often to men, eventually I'd wander home and Mary would inquire about my elocution, whether I'd hit my mark or fallen short or foundered. That was a metaphor my Mary liked. I liked it too because it went two ways at once. Either the so-called ship got stuck on the bar or the faithful horse went lame. The meaning is restrained, yet multiplied. In the primitive country where I was raised, someone would say he's nearly foundered if he'd had too much to eat. A cow, as I recall, could founder. I foundered myself, or nearly so, a time or two, and once it involved cabbage. I could eat the hell out of some cabbage and then go at it again if there were any left. If a pone to sop the liquor in the pot was not at hand, why, I could drink it down in a gulp and draw a sleeve across my chin. It's humbling to be at a speaking engagement and observe how someone speaking passionately might still not make a lick of sense, and raising the passion only digs a deeper hole. And the argument, when overly explained or too voluminous, can lose its footing in the soup of words, to mix a metaphor, and sound like diarrhea of the mind. A mind with the trots, a spew of empty thoughts. Better to shut your big fat trap and take a gander down to the fishing hole. Not that it matters any more to me. I'm afraid my days at the fishing hole are over, as are my speaking engagements and everything. Robert Burns, the Scots poet from the late 1780s, was Lincoln's favorite poet. This is about that. And Burns wrote many of his poems in Scots dialect. Reading Burns as a boy below a tree. My body, straight as the hour hand of a clock, protruded from the trunk, and the spreading tree itself now creaked, the very spindle of time. Wherever I was, at Pigeon Creek, or a tree stubbornly standing on the old prairie. As the sun made its arc across the summer sky, I'd rotate clockwise every hour or so to stay in the shade, moving through time as ever, propping my head against a root, a book spread open in my hands, my mind alive to the difficult dialect of the poetry. But saying it aloud, I was nearly singing and yet becoming a lower branch of the tree. A boy reading a book beneath a tree, a boy becoming part of the book and part of the tree at once. The scene and symbols tied so tightly together they cannot be undone. The weight of death was not upon me yet, nor was being American yet a weight. Only a son, a farmer's son with a book in his hands, lolling beneath a giant tree, saying the verses aloud, the love, the work, the love, the work discovered, the verse, the love composed and set in rhythm to be said, the little life and the larger life compared, though bound together, belonging to each other. The lessons of the young and foolish that haunt an older mind, so it believes the blessing from before, the earlier, innocent time of being, and being alone in work or verse, one learns, though still I cannot frame a toast to Burns. This is the last poem I'll read from Rail Splitter, and before I shift, I want to put in a little bit of a plug, if you don't mind. The theater program at Transylvania is going to do a really interesting multimedia dramatic presentation of this book. There will be singing and recitations and student directed presentations, standalone art pieces, video montages, all kinds of stuff. And I think the air date for the first episode is November 13th. But I will, once I have firm details about that, I'll pass that along to Sarah and Amelia. Hopefully they can send out the appropriate links or information to you all. It will be free and everyone is invited. A madstone was a hairball found in the bellies of ruminant creatures such as buffalo and cattle. And back in the pioneer days, there was a superstition that if someone were bitten by a rabid animal, you could get you a madstone and rub it on the wound, and it would absorb the toxic saliva of the rabid animal. And apparently, this really happened with one of Lincoln's sons. This is about that. And this is called Madstone Alexanders. We've got 6-beat couplets, rhyming couplets here. An Alexandrine line is a 6-foot line from the old days. Madstone Alexanders. I was a superstitious son of a biscuit eater and couldn't abide robbing Paul to pay off Peter, so to speak, as a matter of principle. Yet personal life was different concerning the boys, an extravagant wife. I was indulgent with them, protective. Whatever they needed, I provided, believing happiness, when so well pleaded, deserved my attention. Their delight gave me delight. And that was how I loved when alive. And now in this night, I grasp the imperfection. But what else should one do? You love your people and do what love requires of you. If suddenly love demands of body and mind, for example, going to the ends of the earth to find a primitive conjure woman who owns the only stone around imbued with healing powers for body and bone. I did it for my boy who was bitten by a dog, and the stone prevented him from going mad. A fog, a total fog, recalling now such desperation, and to think how desperately I also loved the nation. I was a father of boys and fathered ideas too, and stubbornly, America, I fathered you. Okay, now I'm shifting to a manuscript that I have sent to my publisher back in probably February, and I have yet to hear one word. Not a surprise, but this is called American Poetry. Tongue-in-cheek title for sure. And I'll tell you what I did to round up the poems in this manuscript. I began by consulting a whole bunch of old anthologies that I've collected through the years. And all I wanted to do was find a poem by a previous American poet and find one line within that poem that just stood out to me for whatever reason. And then I would use that line borrowed from a previous poem as my title. And my effort was not to interpret the previous poem or use it as a prompt in any way. I just let the title sort of begin the page, and then I would just run off and write whatever poem came to mind. One of the anthologies I consulted is this one. It's called The New Poetry, edited by Harriet Monroe and Alice Corbin Henderson. Some of you may know Harriet Monroe founded Poetry Magazine in 1912. This anthology is from 1925. So I wanted, on purpose for the most part, to go back and kind of dip into the older well of American poetry. And incidentally, this would be the time that the first state poetry societies were being formed. So some of the folks in these anthologies may well have been members of their state poetry societies. And you can see here in this poem called Running Vines, I've checked the first line of the poem that says, "Look up, you loose-haired women in the field." A poem by someone named H.L. Davis. Part of what I wanted to do with this project, and here's the poem as it appears in my notebook. See, that's sort of this draft of it. part of what I have really been interested for many years is keeping alive old poets, or bringing back poets that we once read, and returning some of them to our attention. So what I thought I'd do with this, as um, as I said, each title in this manuscript is a line from a previous American poet. And so this is sort of the contents page. And what I tried to do was arrange the contents so that these borrowed lines on their own compose a separate poem. One I didn't write, it's one that I just assembled. So I'm going to read the table of contents for this manuscript, bearing in mind that I didn't write a single word. These are all lifted lines from previous poems. I think the most recent poem here is from the 1960, and then it goes back. American poetry. I am going into the night to find a world of my own, partly to think, more to be left alone. I'm standing near your green-leaved spires, cool, translucent distances of dew, while over them the swallows skim, and this all solemn silentness, the unworn ritual of eternal things. God has thrown heaven wide open, gilded and sticky with a little sting, to hear the music in his mind. The strength of virgin forests braced his mind. The thorn tree had a mind to him. Not always is beauty born of beauty. He may be in some unlikely place, so dark and so dark in the brierly light. Then I eyed the world with all delight. I yielded myself to the perfect whole, hungry and plucking the fruit from some invisible blossoming tree, while the sound of falling water goes on, and I shall stand here like a shadow over songs not quite begun. Morning and evening I shall drink the dew, whisper at midnight through the door, for this is love, and nothing else is love. Free and unable to be, I've drunk lonesome water. I will praise the darkness now, but then the leaf. Camarado, I give you my hand. Up with the dignity of the clod. It has all heaven to itself. It pauses, the low, pale light across that land. Look up, you loose-haired women in the field. Everything's as lazy as an old hound dog. Things will happen mighty strange. Moon goes down and stars grow cold. One grass blade's curve or the throat of one bird, from dusty bondage into luminous air, past meadows salt lick and the lyrics swale. Is this the harvest? What shall this land produce? What do you hear? What does the land command? But here you come unfollowed to this place where least we know it, and where the coldest art, where light collided with the gloom. We were not made eternally to weep, dreaming and swaying and staring. Another thought can come to mind. There is a power here that grips the mind. Soon enough we turn. Time is the school in which we learn. The weeds believed me and the nesting birds, and it seemed gentle and good. Within my dream, the grass is cold. I happen to go by that way, out of me, unworthy and unknown. Eternal here, yet hidden from our eyes. And I speak to you now in the land's voice. Skitty dad did dad. Now I'll just read a few of these and then get on to something else, and then we'll have some questions. So this is Look Up, You Loose-Haired Women from the Field, the poem I wrote based on that first line there. Yes, stooping in a field can be a scene of misery to some. A ragged old world peasant who's digging with a wooden spade potatoes, or humbler still, some turnips, and filling up a woven basket. But digging up a turnip at least is quiet work, and you can smell the open ground's release of the fine, purple-headed root it made with the help of sunlight and water and time. And I am coming with you too. I'm stooping in the field beside you. I'm bending down. I'm kneeling now. Pass me the spade and you can rest. Then we'll all wash up for supper. I have a particular tale to tell us later, involving a turnip, if I can remember how it goes. It's been in my mind all day, blowing a story into my ear. I wound up fiddling with near sonnets and occasional rhyme throughout these poems. So you'll hear some of that here. This one is 2 14-line stanzas. Things'll happen mighty strange. The opening was hard to see because tree shadows made it, like time, appear to have no end and no beginning. But I found the way to deeper woods because an owl inside broke the silence to call me in, and I went in a kind of thoughtless trance to see. Sorrel and ferns were strewn on the ground in a splotchy green mist lifted by the first hill's shoulder, then plunged down the swale as if the land was flowing, and I was wading into the dark current to feel the unnameable pull. The owl appeared to watch me sink from the branch of a black oak. She shifted her grip on the branch as I went under. How long, I wondered, can I go on? So many symbols calling me to belong and become another symbol. Is there a reason I went in? Where is all of this going to go? It's not like this is a story someone like me is imagining how to tell. What do people do in a story like this anyway, except to believe it's going to go beyond the story itself, and something in it can't be told? Moon goes down and stars grow cold. The season cannot stop itself from rolling over the ridgetop or filling up the hollow with fog. Sooner and longer now is the dark. Shadows climb the hillsides and some of the birds chatter that soon they'll leave, and a different kind of quiet will be for those of us who like to listen. When there's almost nothing to listen to, I like to listen to it, like water dripping down a rock or dangling down it as a single string, not the flood of time, only a trickle, silver in moonlight and silver in the sun and shadow, because the water collects whatever light there is. If you can hear a sound like this, then you can also listen beyond it. Whatever sound that is, it's the one that I've been hearing, America. the sound our trickle makes in time, and through the land, through yours and mine. There's a little more rhyme here. These are also sort of a double sonnet. One grass blade's curve or the throat of one bird. I'll tell you one thing you can do if you have an old screen door with the slap gone out of it, is lay it across a pair of sawhorses and spread your shucky beans on the screen and let the sun take it from there. Some people call them leather breeches, but I've always called them shucky beans. One day in November, you'll be glad you kept the old screen door around. The chore of spreading out the beans to dry will be behind you then. But you might remember the scene in the yard with the sawhorses, the rickety door, the beans spread out like green treasure to glitter in the sun. I like the scene because everything in it belongs where it is. The patch of green yard, the sawhorses, the old door bowed with beans, and the dog asleep in the shade of the door. It's a sculpture in the world, made from the world itself, to feed the soul and raise it up where it belongs, because the soul will know itself by belonging to the world that makes it, one hot day with an old screen door whose slapping days will come no more. Okay, probably that's enough of those. I wanted to share, I mentioned to Sarah and Amelia that sharing my quote unquote process might be of some value. And so when I began working on these poems that I just finished reading that were borrowed from lines of previous poets, I would write down the borrowed line, and then I'd write my poem, and then I'd date it. And then for record keeping purposes, I would try to recall where the source that I found the line. And so I began this batch that I just read in August or September of 2018, and I finished it about a year later. The thing that was constructive for me was every day I was able to sit down and write. I knew sort of what my process was going to be. Flip through old anthologies, find a line, write it down, write a poem. All of the poems I just read are in tetrameter, which is the metrical line that I've felt comfortable with for the last 15 years or so. So again, that's a question that's long been answered for me. And I find that, the fewer things you're trying to juggle when you sit down to work, the better. Of course, you're always juggling things, but having some fundamentals in place sort of defines your starting point for the work, or it can. When I finished these poems, I turned around excuse me. I turned the notebook backwards and started writing on the back pages. And that's what I'm going to read to you now. And this is a manuscript called Rain Crow, Scarecrow, Ever Which Away Crow yeehaw jacktails, higher than a cat's back and taller than a tiptoe vine, told in the old high lonesome style, set to slowpoke time. This is my COVID manuscript. I began these in early March and got to a resting place with these in August. And that sounds I don't mean that to sound boastful. It was just, as many of us have perhaps found, this whole situation has given us a different experience of time. And during the initial shutdown, I was able to go out to my little writing cabin at our farm and just sit down and sort of work out in a way. It was sort of like an exercise. But just before, the week before the shutdown, I was in the Boyle County Public Library waiting to pick up our daughter from preschool. And I was working in the genealogy room just because it was the quietest room in the library. And I came upon a book published in 1970 called Pioneer Families of Clay County, Kentucky by Kelly and Hazel Morgan, husband and wife team. Clay County, Kentucky happens to be where much of my dad's side of the family settled, and they were among the pioneer families. And I started thumbing through this sort of genealogical document. It's not a professional document. It's a lot of, oral history in a way. But I started writing down some people's names, and these are real names. I'm just gonna, you can see I made notes. They're just wonderful names. Beardy, Pet, Halt, Adna, Elamora, Harm, Gillis, Ants, Pearl, Abijah, Amasa, Dud, Lopper, Blind, Bug, Dump, Mally, Docky, Link Hare, that's a person's name, Link Hare, Blue Buck Bowling, Euleen, Veda, Zilphy, Lushaba, Mocker Jack, Smiling Dave, Blackwater Bill, Bugger Bill. Anyway, that was just like opening a treasure chest. And for whatever reason, I had the sense to just start copying down those names because very soon the library was going to be closed. I was since able to go back to the library, record further names, and I guess with this batch, I just call them the Rain Crow poems. And Rain Crow, some of you may recall, is a kind of a country name for a cuckoo. So I'm going to, what I wanted to do was just make use of these names of people who lived in the 19th century and give them a dramatic setting. So these are mostly narrative poems, also in that 4-beat line. Here's one called Playing Dixie Rook, a variety of card game, the old game Rook. I remember playing Dixie Rook one night with an older boy named Docky and his mother Zonnie and some man Miss Zonnie knew named Brack. And Brack and Miss Zonnie cheated right through and slapped the table when the deck was done. Miss Zonnie said if we'd been playing for nickels, Docky and I would be broker than a pissant's matchstick in the wind. And Docky answered with the truth, why, hell, Mammy, we're broke already. We're poorer than a pissant's toe. And so is everyone around. Miss Zonnie cleared her throat and said, Docky, you'd better watch your mouth. I'm trying my damnedest to raise you right, and I'll not have you talk that way. This here's a strictly Christian home. I won't have no cussing in it. Hell's bells, we're sitting on the porch, was Docky's not so wise reply. Miss Zonny slapped the back of his head. Hell is real, Miss Zonny, I offered. I've heard the preachers preach against it. I'd allow the boys are right, said Brack. Just look around. If this ain't hell, we can't be far from such a place. I looked around. Chickens pecked at bugs in the grass. The dew had dropped and the moon was peeping over the ridge. I'd say it's farther away than you think, I said. The chickens aren't in torment. There ain't a hell for chickens, son, said Brack. It only hell that is for us. That's right, Miss Zonny said. It's only a hell for us. Besides, a chicken don't know what's right or wrong, and God don't saddle the critters with the plight. But a boy had better get it right. Why, Mammy, you just rhymed, said Docky. I never meant to, honey. I say sometimes it just comes out that way. Now there you go again. You cheated rook. You hit me on the head. You won't let me cuss on the porch, and now you've turned to rhyming, Docky said. By God, what kind of mammy are you? The kind who's going to love the hell right out of you, Miss Zonny said. And as for cheating, honey, listen, there's no end of cheating in this world. But every wickedness that is begins when someone tries to cheat and thinks he can get away with it. And sometimes, honey, that's what happens. This is called The Romantic Poets. If anybody needs a head for a grubbing hoe, I've got 3 to spare. You can take your pick. Pig iron is what they're made of, but they sing as good as any ever made. My trouble has to do with handles. I'm head rich and handle poor when it comes to the world of grubbing hoes. I had a friend named Bugger Veach, and Bug could take a hickory plank and turn it spryly until it was round enough to suit your hands. But Bug is out of the handle-making business on account of death. Yes, Bug was as stout as a mule tree, but he got felled by bounden death that came in the form of a big woman he was courting when she found out old Bug was sparking another woman on the side. She knocked him graveyard dead with the skillet. Bug Beach, killed by a skillet, with a mean woman clutching the handle. It has struck me as a fine piece of drama that a handle maker of Bug's repute should meet his end at the hand of a woman who turned a handle against him and gave him a mortal whack. He didn't die like the other poets, coughing up corrupted lungs or swimming a treacherous patch of water or slain by a fever caught in a swamp. But Bug Veach died a poet's death, and the legend of his art survives. I'll read one more of these. This one's a little bit longer and more dramatically involved and features some chickens. This is called History Laid Bare. The Binges were a rangy bunch, owing no doubt to Burr Binge's approach to animal husbandry. The chickens roamed in and out of the house at their pleasure and roosted on the spires of the old pump organ Burr propped in the parlor, and clearly Burr amused himself at naming daughters. The big one was Delight, but Burr just called her Light Binge. The more comely daughter was History. I don't mind saying that I was sweet on History Binge, but just like Delight, History was only her given name. Burr Binge called her Hissy. Burr, Light, and Hissy Binge. In school one day, I asked Hissy if she liked music. Music? She said. Why, honey, music's my middle name. History Music Binge? I wondered. Now, no, it's just an expression, hoss. If you come see me Sunday, I'll play the organ for you and sing a tune. So I received her invitation. Sunday seemed a long way off, and during the wait, I found myself stuck in the throes of pondering my future with a girl named History. When I got to the binge home place, the door was open and a chicken ran out in the yard and dusted its feathers. I called out, "Hissy, it's me, Hoss. Come in, honey. I'm in the parlor." When I got there, she was pumping the organ in her bare feet. And all the rest of Hissy Binge was also bare, and her hair was shining on her shoulders. It was useless to avert my eyes. She sat on a red velvet cushion, pumping and playing a tune I knew, and 6 chickens bobbed in time from the lofty reaches of the organ. "My God, Hissy, what's going on?" I blubbered, barely believing the scene. "Oh, Hoss, it's just the way we do it out here." "Do what?" I ventured. "Honey, it's how we get the chickens to lay. The music puts them in the mood, can't you see?" And then Hissy intoned, "I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown." When she finished, an elevated chicken clucked, and a rolling sound began cascading through the organ pipes, and presently into a basket nestled by Hissy's pretty feet, there landed triumphantly an egg. "I can't believe any of this is happening, Hissy. Is it real?" "My father is old Burr Binge, and this is my father's house. His ways are rare, but plump as a feather pillow with mystery, and honey, he's wily. This organ is nothing but providence. Can't you see it as a symbol? You've allowed temptation to flatter you, and doesn't it make you feel unhinged? Poor honey Hoss, you've gone astray and didn't know where you were going." Hissy coyly turned her head. "Now everything you've seen today, from the chicken dusting her wings in the yard to the open door, from this old organ to my bright body, even the teary gospel tune, it's all my father's concoction. Burr Binge is only the artist of this place. But he wanted me to give you something, honey, a dream you'll never forget. And isn't that what history is? An endless dream you can't forget. And can't you hear the music in it?" Thank you. I'll pause there and hope I haven't put anybody to sleep.
Thank you, Maurice. I love hearing you sing. Okay, it looks like we've got 2 questions, so let me bring those up. The first question was from Kelly Vance, and she asked, "Will there be a banjo?" And I'm thinking that this was connected to maybe the transy presentation of Lincoln.
Yeah. In fact, I have a banjo that I need to put new strings on, and then we'll be set.
Okay. Let me see the second question. Okay, this is from Marianne. "Hi, Maurice. I know you've probably been asked this question before, especially after your Daniel Boone book, but could you talk about how you found the voice of Lincoln? What were your habits or motivations, and how you crafted the ways that Lincoln would talk?"
That's a very good question. Like any of us, I think, Lincoln didn't start out eloquent. Um, he built up to it, and he knew he was starting from, negative territory, below zero, shall we say. I didn't want to over research Lincoln because there's so much about him, so many takes on his life that I could have spent the rest of mine fiddling with the research. So I read a couple of, I read one semi-amateur biography and one scholarly biography, and then I just read Lincoln's letters and speeches, getting his own words. And, they go back to the 1830s, the earliest examples of his letters, and you can just sort of see over time how he kind of forms himself, and he largely formed himself by reading, um, and often reading beyond himself. Uh, he was also very keen to memorize things, and that because he lacked a formal education, just reciting to himself poems, passages from Shakespeare, passages from other works of literature. Um, I think he maybe trained his ear a bit, and definitely, even his prose has a rhythm, a detectable rhythm. So I just kind of put myself in the position of absorbing his vibes as best I could. Also, we live in Washington County, which is where his parents met and married. Um, and so I could go places where his parents were, and then I went over to Hodgenville where he was born and put my foot on the ground he walked on. Went to the little place they lived in southern Indiana and did the same thing, and then to Springfield, Illinois, and trotted around there. Then went to Washington and Ford's Theater, places like that. It was an immersive experience, and it was really gratifying to do. You're muted, Amelia.
Okay, thank you. Um, this question's from Matt. From what I've read of your poetry and heard tonight, there seems to be a kind of ghost of blank verse underlying some of what you write. Could you comment on adapting that, as you've done so well, to poetry in the 21st century?
Um, Thank you, Matt. That's a really insightful question. If you go to the handbooks for prosody and things like that, blank verse is identified as unrhymed lines of either pentameter or tetrameter. It's much more common to have pentameter, as we do in Shakespeare's speeches and things like that, or Coleridge and Wordsworth, and um, a lot of Frost, some Elizabeth Bishop. Um, Over the years, it's just seemed more natural to my ear to work with a four beat line because it's more the rhythm of the speech that I grew up hearing, and still hear today. Um, I've said this on a number of occasions, but it's an easy example. Several years ago, I was at a gas station in Perryville getting gasoline, and this older man got out of his truck, and a younger woman got out of her car, and apparently they knew each other, and she had recently had a baby. And he asked, how are things going? And she said, you know, he's sleeping through the night or whatever she said. And then the man said, so the little feller's doing good. Um, and there's a lot to like about that that line, but it's a 4-beat line. But I love all the uh, double T, double L, and then double O and good. Just the convergence, or what did Letha say today? Did she use the word convergence? Um, Something like that, a similar word. It's the convergence of the rhythm and the consonants. Congruence, yes, thank you, Matt. I see that. Is the congruence of rhythm and those double consonants that really made that line catch my ear. So, and I've subsequently thought that a line of pentameter, because it's 1 foot longer and may require, just a little more verbiage or ornament or modification, is sort of halfway between talking and thinking. And for me, tetrameter, because it's a shorter line, is halfway between talking and singing. And I love music, and so it just and those of us, I saw Gail Chandler participating in Letha's workshop earlier, and Letha herself, and Marianne Worthington, uh, Eric Sutherland, folks I saw participating earlier. I think through conversations we've had through the years, we've agreed that there's something to the local Kentucky vernacular that has a song-like quality to it, not just in rhythm, but you know, sort of a melody in the pitch of vowel sounds and things like that. That is distinct, I believe. And so, as I sometimes say, I'm playing by ear with the 4-beat line.
I am unmute. Okay. We've got 2 more questions. Let's see, this is from Kathleen. The last poems that you read had such authentic voices. Where do those come from?
The old women in my family, my great great aunt Clara Burchell, my grandmother Lillian Baker Manning, especially I was fortunate to know them both into my adult life, and they were just great storytellers, and that sort of native art is full of music and pause and declaration and gesture. It's even though neither my great great aunt nor my grandmother were trained in storytelling, it was just the world they grew up in and intended to pass on in their way. And yeah, to me, um, a contemplative poem has its place, which was largely what I was trying to do with the Lincoln book. But more often, I'm interested in a dramatic poem where there's actually something happening and there's a scene and there are tangible objects to grab and get a hold of, and a physical movement to make, sounds to hear, a a visceral and embodied world that the poem happens to occur in. And then what I try to do on the page is, you know, pull that pull that poem and out of that dramatic reality and put it on the page so it stays alive.
Maybe. Okay. Libby asked, let's see, Maurice, from working with those earlier American poems, what did you learn about American poetry? How is it distinctive?
Well, Libby, one thing that one discovers is how American poetry has changed. I think it's not absolutely the case, but going back, say, 100 years in American poetry, so many poems seemed to have a kind of public voice. Um, you know, a sense of our common uh, ground, coming from our common experience, and um, not with the exception, I intentionally for that particular project, I intentionally did not consult, you know, the canonical writers of the area. So no T.S. Eliot, no Wallace Stevens, no Marianne Moore or Gertrude Stein or folks like that. They don't need to be revisited. We still talk about them. But the poets that I found interesting um, often were highly musical. Um, they were, as I say, they seemed to kind of recognize a public sphere that the poem is one that we in general partake of, and that the expression was not one of personal neuroses or agitation. Um, Not that the poems that I looked at were happy-go-lucky in any stretch, but you know, not quite so dire as some of the more existential modernists um, got into. It's a good question. Um, I found it refreshing to go back to the old anthologies and just find one line in one poem that just seemed to have its own integrity, and it it had a positive effect for me.
Okay, we've got two more questions. I think this is from John. After Boone and Lincoln, who's, or maybe which, whose other famous Kentuckian voice, perhaps a woman's, might inspire you?
Ah, I don't know. That's a good question. Loretta Lynn
That's a good one.
comes to mind. Uh, I've these two books, the one on Boone and the one in Lincoln's voice, tend to take a lot out of me. So it's hard to imagine having more to say in the voice of a historical Kentuckian. But thank you for the suggestion, John. I will. I'm going to just write down Loretta Lynn in my notebook, and Another uh, um, gosh, one of the lead players in the original Coon Creek Girls, Lily Mae Ledford, who actually my great aunt sewed dresses for her to perform in at Renfro Valley back in the 30s. Lily Mae might be somebody I visit, and we can. She was a great banjo player, great singer. I'll write them both down, John. You've given me an assignment, so thanks a lot.
Okay, and it looks like one last question from my sister. So this is from Cannon. You seem to be able to channel old voices or poets. Do you ever imagine how the future poets will sound? How much of this old time phraseology will continue on? Will that Kentucky vernacular be with us in years to come?
An excellent question. Probably no. That vernacular will not be with us. And part of my own sort of personal mission is to be some kind of preservationist. Um, I'm aware that like the way my great aunt Clara talked, and I'm fortunate I have a recording I made of her in about 1992 when she was 102. Or no, I made it in 1990 and she was 102. She was born in 1888. Nobody talks like that anymore. And I just for solace and wonder and joy, I often listen back to that recording. I've also got a recording of an old bluegrass singer um, and banjo player whose name was Pappy Taylor, and he and his band played at a 4th of July picnic that was in our backyard when I was growing up, and I recorded that. It's a terrible quality, but and Mr. Taylor would have been born in the 1800s too. So hearing those old voices and being able to rehear them is really important to me, and I, one of the things I guess fuels my sense of preserving the particular voice, the vernacular, is it has a literary quality built into it. It's not a studied or intentional literary quality, but it's there. I can remember there's a joke on the 1976 4th of July tape. Mr. Taylor says, "Did I ever tell you about my old bald-headed uncle? Sold shoes over in Harlan. He was in there one day, and this lady come in, and he was nearsighted, and she sat down and put her foot up there, and she looked, no, she was nearsighted. She was nearsighted, and she looked down and saw his bald head, thought it was her bare knee, and she took the hem of her dress and shoved it over his head like to smother him to death right there." Uh, so, I mean, you hear things like that, and they stick. And I just want to continue um, appreciating that kind of speech, and that it's not just speech, it's an outlook on the world. It's a way of being in the world reflected by the speech, a way of being in the world with basic good humor and basic happiness. So those are useful as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Okay, that looks like all of our questions. Got a couple of things. Please remember to visit our book fair. There is a link in the program, and you can find works by Maurice Manning and all of our other workshop leaders, our panelists, and everyone you've seen on screen. So please visit the book fair. And we have several wonderful sponsors that we need to thank. Accents Publishing, Bluegrass Writer Studio, Broadstone Books, Rabbit House Press, Spalding University School of Creative and Professional Writing, University Press of Kentucky, Workhorse Writers, and Shadeland House Modern Press. Thank you all for your support of the Kentucky Poetry Society's annual conference. Let me see. There is, I think, still a chance to sign up for the open mic. That's tomorrow. And the weekend poetry contest, which I created the prompt based on Rail Splitter. So please get your poem in for that. This is our last event of day one, and we will see you back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for the workshop with Joy Priest, which is called The Poet's Report. And then last of all, please fill out the feedback form so we can know how to improve and what you enjoyed from this year's conference. So thank you very much, Maurice. That was fantastic. It was great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see everybody. What a treat.
Sarah, did you have anything else?